night guard startled awake, the creak of wood and the faint toll of metal breaking through the stillness. For a moment, he thought it was part of a dream, that drifting haze between sleep and wakefulness. But then it came again, one thin, eerie chime drifting through the black winter air. His breath caught. The bell. He rose from the chair in the cemetery office, joints stiff from the cold, and grabbed his flashlight. The beam sliced across rows of gravestones, each one capped with frost that glittered like dull glass. The night was silent otherwise. No wind, no insects, no rustling of trees. He could hear his own pulse in his ears as he followed the sound. Another chime, louder this time. It wasn't coming from the chapel or the entrance gate. It was coming from the far corner of the graveyard, the part even locals avoided. His boots crunched on frozen earth as he moved closer, muttering to himself, just to break the silence. Probably just the rope stuck, old iron, wind playing tricks. But his own words felt hollow. When he reached the grave, he froze. The rope swayed violently back and forth, the small brass bell shrieking each time it jolted, yet the air was utterly still. He raised his flashlight and followed the rope down. It disappeared into a mound of earth darkened with fresh moisture. The grave was older than any others, the name on the stone so weathered it was almost unreadable. "Hello?" His voice cracked as he leaned closer. "Is someone alive in there?" The words sounded absurd, but leaving them unspoken was worse. The bell answered for him, letting out another frantic clamor, as if yanked from below. His breath misted in the air. He glanced around, empty rows of stones, nothing but silence beyond the shrill ringing. No pranksters, no wind, no animals, just that grave. He crouched, pressing his gloved hand against the soil. It was loose, damp, as if it had been disturbed recently. A sudden jolt ran through the rope, strong enough to pull it sideways. He stumbled back, nearly dropping his light. "No." His whisper trembled. "That's not possible." He circled the grave, flashlight beam trembling with the shake of his hand. The earth looked uneven, not like the solid, untouched ground of the others. His boots sank slightly when he stepped closer, dirt sticking wet and dark against the leather. The bell gave one final shriek, and then still, swinging lazily as though it had exhausted itself. The rope dangled limp, no movement from below. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. He leaned in, holding the light close, trying to steady his breathing. That's when he saw them, marks in the soil just above the coffin line. Thin, deep grooves running upward, jagged like nails tearing through wood and dirt. Claw marks. Fresh. The guard staggered back, heart hammering so hard he thought it would burst. He wanted to run, to call for help, but his legs rooted him in place, his light fixed on those impossible lines, etched in the grave. His chest rose and fell in panicked gasps, each one a puff of white fog in the dark. The rope swayed one last time, though nothing touched it. And then, stillness. He stood alone under the frozen night sky, boots wet with earth that had no right to be disturbed, staring at the grave that had just moved from the inside. The lantern's flame hissed in the windless dark, its glow stretching just far enough to reveal rows of leaning stones. The guard sat hunched on a folding chair beside the grave, coffee steaming in his hands, eyes locked on the rope above the soil. His watch ticked past 2:59. The world around him felt drained, like the cemetery itself was holding its breath. He told himself he was ready this time, ready to see if the bell would ring again. But every creak of wood, every groan of frozen ground, made his shoulders tense. From behind him, a voice cut through the silence. "You're wasting your nights," he turned sharply. The town priest stood in the lantern's glow, black coat buttoned to his throat, a book clutched under his arm. His breath came out in fog as he stepped closer. "It's just a robe," the priest said flatly. "Iron shrinks in the cold. Wind tugs. You've been on this job too long." The guard shook his head, whispering like a man afraid to wake the earth. "I saw it pull, not sway. Pull. Something was fighting to get out." The priest's lips tightened as though he were trying not to laugh. "Do not give your fear power. The dead are silent. Always." The guard opened his mouth, but the words died in his throat as the bell let out a thin chime. Both men froze. The rope was still. Not a twitch, not a tremor. Yet the sound lingered, sharp as broken glass in the stillness. "Do you hear that?" the guard whispered. The priest's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Another chime. Louder, clearer, still. The rope remained perfectly still in the lantern light. The guard rose to his feet, heart thudding. His breath came shallow, fast. "It's not the wind. It's not." He swallowed hard. "It's coming from beneath." The priest stepped closer, anger flaring to cover fear. "Enough of this. You want to scare yourself into madness? Be my guest. But I will not stand here and watch you." The guard dropped to his knees, pressing his ear against the soil. The cold bit through his skin, but beneath it, faint as a dying heartbeat, he heard something. A scraping, a dragging, a desperate rhythmic scratch against wood. He jerked upright, eyes wide, hands trembling. "Someone's down there." The priest's face drained of color, but he shook his head violently. "That coffin has been sealed for centuries. You know that." The guard's voice cracked. "Then why can I hear it?" For a moment, the night seemed to lean in, waiting. The priest stared at the grave, throat tight, while the guard knelt again, unable to stop himself. He pressed his ear down. The sound was clearer this time, nails clawing against wood, frantic and uneven. His mouth went dry. "God help me." The priest turned away, whispering rapid prayers under his breath. The guard stumbled back, his knees weak, coffee forgotten and spilled into the dirt. His eyes locked on the rope. The bell was silent now, but the ground beneath him felt alive, as if something deep below shifted with each scrape. He backed away, one step at a time, pulse roaring in his ears. The soil trembled faintly, enough to rattle the lantern on its hook. Then it stopped. Silence pressed in on all sides, thicker than before. The priest finally looked back at him, eyes hard with denial, but wet with fear. And in that silence, just as the guard began to breathe again, a new sound rose from the ground, softer than a whisper, carried on the still air. "Let me out." The words froze his blood. The voice was muffled, fragile, but unmistakably human. The guard staggered back, staring at the grave. His throat closed on a scream. The priest clutched his cross, eyes wide in terror. The rope didn't move. The bell didn't ring, but something alive was beneath the soil, and it had spoken. The guard jolted awake, head slumped against the cold stone wall of the cemetery office. His lantern had burned low, the last of its flame trembling weakly. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the haze of sleep, when a sound reached him, thin, ghost-like. "Let me out." The words floated through the still air, no louder than a breath, yet they froze him where he sat. He turned his head slowly toward the window, The grave was out there, barely visible in the fading glow. His hands shook as he grabbed the lantern and stepped into the night. Frost crunched under his boots. Every gravestone loomed like a shadow waiting to move. He stopped at the grave, holding the light close. The rope hung limp, stiff with frost. The bell was silent. But when he crouched, something caught his eye. The soil around the rope looked disturbed, as though fingers had dragged through it. He brushed the dirt aside, revealing frayed fibers, pulled downward into the soil. His stomach turned cold. Someone, or something, had been yanking the rope from below. A memory stirred, something he'd overheard years ago in town. The story of Margaret Halloway, a young woman buried alive in 1823. She'd been ill, mistaken for dead, sealed in her coffin while her family prayed above her grave. By the time workers returned to dig her out, the bell rope had snapped and the coffin was silent. They said she cursed the town with her final breath, vowing she would never rest until someone answered her call. The guard whispered into the cold night, voice trembling. "Margaret, is that you?" No answer. Only silence thick enough to crush him. He pressed his palm to the ground, heart pounding. The soil vibrated faintly under his touch. Not shaking, scratching. He ripped his hand back, bile rising in his throat. His breathing turned shallow, fogging in frantic bursts. His eyes darted around the cemetery, searching for movement, for proof this wasn't madness, clawing at his mind. "God forgive me," he muttered, backing away. "I hear you. I hear you." The lantern flickered, its glass fogging suddenly. His breath caught. He wasn't breathing on it. He was standing too far away. And yet, on the glass, a pale imprint bloomed. A handprint, long-fingered, pressed from the inside. The guard dropped the lantern, its light rolling across the ground. Darkness surged in around him. He scrambled back, hands scraping against the frozen soil. Eyes locked on that fogged handprint, glowing faintly in the broken lantern's light. The grave lay silent, the bell unmoving, but the night had grown heavier, as if something beneath the soil was no longer begging, only waiting. The rope twitched. The guard had been staring at it for hours, his eyes dry, his body numb from the cold. At first, he thought it was fatigue, another cruel trick of his mind. But then it jerked again, harder this time, snapping taut, as if something below had seized it with desperate strength. He stumbled forward, lantern clutched tight, watching as the bell shivered and let out a sharp clang. The sound tore through the graveyard like a scream. "No, no, not again," he whispered. His voice cracked against the silence. The rope yanked downward so violently that the stake holding it bent in the soil. Panic surged. He grabbed the rope with both hands, trying to steady it, but it burned against his palms as it fought to pull away from him. "Stop, stop." His words broke into ragged gasps. A shout cut through the night. "What are you doing?" The priest strode toward him, black coat flaring in the lantern light. His face twisted with anger and fear. "Look," the guard cried, pointing at the rope as it writhed in his grip. "Tell me you see this." The priest froze. For a long moment, he said nothing, his eyes fixed on the rope straining downward, the soil shifting around its base. His lips parted, but the words trembled as they left him. It's the wind. The wind," the guard barked. His voice cracked into hysteria. "Then what's pulling the ground open?" Both turned as the soil bulged upward, cracking in jagged lines. The earth seemed to breathe, swelling, sinking. Then Swelling again, the lantern's glow flickered across the grave marker, and the name etched in stone blurred in the shaking light, as if the earth itself rejected it. The priest clutched the cross at his chest. "You must let it be. If you give it your fear, it will take more." But the guard couldn't let go. The rope fought against his grip like a living thing, dragging his hands toward the dirt. He wrapped it around the iron fence post, bracing with all his strength. "Please." His whisper broke, half a sob. "If someone's still down there." The rope snapped. It lashed upward with a whip-like crack, flying into the night air. The bell spun away into the darkness, its echo fading across the gravestones. The guard collapsed to his knees, palms raw and bleeding where the fibers had torn him. For the first time all night, the grave lay utterly still. The soil stopped shifting. The air was empty of sound. The priest's voice shook. "It's over." But the guard's eyes remained locked on the mound of earth, chest heaving. He felt it, though nothing moved, though nothing made a sound. Something beneath was still awake. The silence pressed closer, heavier than before. And then the ground gave the faintest shudder, like a breath held back. Both men froze, eyes wide. And then, nothing. The grave went still again, as if mocking them, daring them to wait for the next pull. At dawn, the cemetery was no longer empty. The townsfolk had gathered, their breaths clouding the pale morning air. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as shovels bit into the soil of the grave. The guard stood a few steps back, trembling hands jammed into his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the mound that had haunted his nights. The priest hovered near him, lips moving in constant prayer. He would not look at the guard, nor at the grave. The diggers worked in silence, the scrape of metal against dirt, the only sound. With every shovelful, the guard's chest tightened. He had begged for this, demanded proof. But now that the earth was being peeled away, dread curdled in his stomach. One of the workers paused, frowning. "Ground soft," he muttered. "Shouldn't be." Another shovel broke through with a hollow crack. The guard flinched at the sound. The men cleared the remaining dirt, and the coffin lid came into view. Splintered, rotted, but undeniably shattered from the inside out. A collective gasp shivered through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Sweet Lord." The guard stepped closer, despite his knees shaking. The coffin lid bore deep grooves, long jagged lines carved by desperate hands. He could see where fingernails had splintered against the wood, where bone had scraped through flesh in the struggle. Inside, the remains were not peaceful. The skeleton lay twisted, its jaw frozen in an eternal scream, nails chipped and broken down to splinters. Shreds of fabric clung to the bones, cloth so old it should have turned to dust, yet damp and torn as if clawed only yesterday. "This," the investigator muttered, wiping sweat from his brow, though the air was cold. "This coffin hasn't been opened in over 150 years. The priest's voice cracked into the hush. Then what clawed its way out? Silence swept the graveyard, heavier than any sermon. The guard's breath came shallow. He wanted to run, to leave this cursed place, but his legs wouldn't move. His eyes locked on the soil around the coffin, churned in unnatural patterns, as if something had crawled upward and then vanished. A woman in the crowd whispered, "It's not resting. It never rested." The guard's gaze rose slowly to the rope. It hung severed, frayed ends dangling just above the torn earth. He could still feel its pull in his hands, the fight against something buried alive. or something that should have stayed buried. The investigator slammed the coffin shut and barked, "Enough! Cover it, now!" The workers moved quickly, but their eyes darted nervously to the shadows between stones. The priest clutched his book tighter, his voice low, as if the words weren't meant for anyone but himself. "You have woken it." The guard looked at him sharply. "Woken what?" The priest didn't answer. He only turned his face away, lips trembling in silent prayer. That night, the guard returned to his post, heart raw with fear and questions. The cemetery lay still, moonlight silvering the stones. He told himself it was over. It had to be over. Then the sound came. Not one bell, but many, all at once. Dozens of thin, brittle chimes filled the night air, echoing across the cemetery like a chorus of the damned. The ropes above the graves swayed violently in the windless dark. The guard's breath caught in his throat as he spun, lantern shaking in his grip. Every bell tolled, every rope strained, as if the dead below were calling. Together, and he realized with a cold weight in his chest, it had never been about just one grave. The bells screamed. Every rope in the graveyard strained at once, clanging in wild, uneven rhythm, as if the dead below were thrashing against their coffins in unison. The guard staggered backward, hands clamped over his ears, lantern swinging wildly in his grip. The sound was deafening, endless, a funeral chorus tearing the night apart. "God have mercy," the priest whispered, crumpled on his knees. His rosary rattled in trembling fingers, his lips bleeding from prayers mumbled too fast. The guard's breath came in frantic bursts, white clouds tearing from his mouth. He spun in place, lantern beams skimming across gravestones that seemed to shiver in the cacophony. The soil trembled beneath his boots, first faint, then stronger, until cracks spiderwebbed across the frost. "Help me," he shouted at the priest, voice breaking. "We have to stop this." The priest only shook his head, eyes clenched shut. "There is no stopping it. You called them awake." The ground shuddered hard enough to knock the guard off his feet. He caught himself on his hands but froze when he felt it, scraping, frantic movement just below the surface. 100 tiny vibrations, like nails clawing toward the open air. "No." His whisper was barely audible over the bells. "No, no, no." The soil burst. One grave cracked wide, earth flying as skeletal fingers tore free, reaching for the sky. The guard screamed, scrambling backward as a rotted hand clawed at the air, the bell above it ringing furiously. Another grave split open, then another. The lantern flickered, shadows leaping across jagged hands breaking through the ground. The smell of damp rot rose with the cold mist, thick enough to choke. "They're all waking." The guard gasped, voice shaking. "God help us," the priest choked, clutching his cross so tightly his knuckles bled. The bells tolled on, faster, wilder, until they no longer rang in turns, but as one unbroken, shrieking scream. The guard stumbled toward the gates, legs weak but stopped short. Because suddenly, silence. Every bell cut off in the same breath. Every rope hung slack. The night was still. He stood frozen, chest heaving, ears ringing from the abrupt void. The priest dared to open his eyes, trembling, lips parted in disbelief. The graves lay torn and ragged, soil unsettled, ropes ripped free, but nothing moved. No hands reached upward, no sound rose from below. For a moment, hope flickered. Maybe it was over. Maybe whatever had risen had fallen back into the earth. Then the guard's lantern flared and died, Darkness swallowed the cemetery whole. When the sun rose, hours later, the graveyard looked calm again. The ropes dangled limp in the pale light, dozens of them cut, their bells resting silent on the ground. The graves were uneven, but no hands, no bodies, no sign of struggle remained. The priest was gone. The guard stood alone, eyes hollow, skin ashen, staring at the field of graves. They said afterward the bells never rang again, not once, because nothing below needed to call for help anymore.